Daiquiri. The name evokes easy feelings, good times, summer breeze, endless clear blue water, and a beach that just keeps on going. Well, the history of the Daiquiri is rather, on the one hand, utterly uncomplicated, and on the other hand, immensely complicated. Most people would like to point out that the Daiquiri was supposedly discovered by an American mining engineer operating in Daiquiri, Cuba, the name of the mine he was at, when he discovered, by chance no less, come across a drink that he claims he invented, or discovered, whichever you like. But the drink he describes is nothing like any of these at all. It's a high glass filled with lime, crushed ice, rum, a little bit of sugar, and that's it. That's the Daiquiri. If we look at the Daiquiris we made today, sure, it sort of fits the description of most of them, but it's not that, especially not in the glass type. We have a low ball and a bunch of wine glasses, martini glasses, that sort of thing. A more cocktail-esque glass, not something that you would drink grog out of. A drink that was invented to fight scurvy and quickly swept over the entirety of the Caribbean due to its naval roots. Grog properly is the English drink, but the Spaniards almost certainly adapted one and almost certainly spread it around a whole lot. And as you can see, it's an adaptation to that. It's the idea of, so we have grog, but now we have ice, which you didn't used to have in the 1700s because the ice trade wasn't set up yet. By about 1880s into the turn of the 19th century, suddenly Cuban miners, plantationers, and all sorts of people had access to ice. And it was even relatively cheap and very useful if you're sweating like you wouldn't believe in the Caribbean, working all day. So it very quickly found its way into the drink of choice, turning what was something akin to grog into a daiquiri. Now, how daiquiris evolved into the common culture answers some of our questions about the differences we see in a daiquiri. See, the daiquiri reinvents itself every once and again. That original drink was served to a rear admiral in the United States Navy, a medical officer, who happened to then bring the drink back to DC, to the Army and Navy bar, whereupon it became absolutely infectious amongst officers and serving men in DC. And then it spread across, well, you have a bill up on Capitol Hill, and it wandered its way all about the parts of DC. However, it was still a rum drink, and in that period of time, rum was sort of seen as the drink of alcoholics, villains, persons of low standing, and seamen. Well, all that began to shift over the years. As prohibition set in, suddenly no one was allowed to drink anything, daiquiris included, sadly. And then after that, into the 40s with rationing. As World War II set through, rationing made access to whiskey and vodka extremely scarce. And even the vodka wasn't all that hot of a thing yet. It was the hot and rising drink. And whiskey at that time was the staple of every manly man's drinking diet, such that if you were in the United States still in the early 40s through to the late 40s, you were less likely to be able to have access to whiskey or bourbon or vodka, even gin, such that you were almost incentivized, just from that alone, to try rum. On top of this, the Pan American Agreement, signed by FDR in the early 40s, made it such that the United States normalized its trade and travel negotiations and agreements with the Caribbean and Latin America. Not just the United States protectorates in those countries, but every island nation in the Caribbean and most of Latin America. Meaning that Americans could now easily travel, pick up a daiquiri, have a bit of rum, and have a good time. It also meant that you could import rum much more cheaply and much more readily with much less risks. because of these trade regulations, because you're paying way less in tariffs, you were paying way less in fees, and there was more of this demand building, such that by the late 40s, the daiquiri was a absolute craze. People went from drinking very traditional styled cocktails like old fashions or whiskey sidecars or sours or old school classic gin drinks, that sort of thing, to the hip young thing was to go drink a daiquiri. In this moment, the daiquiri that used to exist was no longer the daiquiri that was being hyped up. It was the drink of yesteryear still. So the barkeeps who were in that time making daiquiris saw a drink that requires a certain amount of rum, a certain amount of lime, a certain amount of ice, and some sugar. And they sat there and went, well, I have a drink. It involves these things. That's a daiquiri. So we have drinks that are more original to the original intent, such as our daiquiri number 1 here, which is in this lovely dragon glass. It looks fantastic. And more importantly, this is something close to what the original daiquiri would have been. It is lime, mint, rum, and a little bit of Demerara syrup, which is basically pure cane syrup. It's sugar as it would have been in the turn of the 20th century. None of that white processed stuff that's all been processed through these days, which takes too long and transports better, but isn't as easy to produce. So, this guy right here, by way of Smuggler's Cove and based off of a Trader Vic's recipe from the 1930s, while not the original, gets called the daiquiri number 1 because it's like the original. It's highly reminiscent and tastes probably pretty similar. Ignoring that it's made a few stylistic changes, and we made a couple more now. Over the years, styles and tastes changed a little more, and people were willing to try new, different things with daiquiris. And this radical madman who liked writing books, who was an adventurer by the name of Ernest Hemingway, yes, he's an absolute Chad, yes, he drinks like a frat boy, and yes, he makes obscene requests out of Cuban bartenders, he basically walked into a barkeep, and this is a daiquiri that isn't even here, we will get to it another time in this channel. He walked into a barkeep and basically said, give me double the rum, double the lime, I don't need the sugar, I don't need the ice. And then that became its own little thing that was also called a daiquiri. And then the corrections to take Hemingway's new favorite thing, and a lot of people were fans of Hemingway, so they wanted to try how he wanted it. And then they very quickly figured out that they didn't have the liver for that, because no one did. And they very quickly had to rebalance that drink. So rebalances of that drink became more and more popular. Such that we have a drink over here, like our number 4, which is something of a post-Hemingway. It's had new flavors introduced, like maraschino liqueur, to give different sorts of notes to fill out the flavor profile again after it's been stripped down of the sugars. And it's a rather different mouthfeel of drink. It has wildly different flavors going on in it. It has this very full and broad profile that some daiquiris are somewhat lacking in, but not entirely. The daiquiri is still a relatively complicated drink. It's just this thing is rocket science by comparison. Well, I say rocket science, it was the 40s, they were more like really fast airplanes. As the mid-20th century was coming upon us, more and more persons wanted to embrace easy air travel and that idea of having a vacation. However, many people couldn't actually access that yet. They wanted to, but they didn't actually get up and go anywhere because they still had full-time jobs that figured that you couldn't do these things. So they were still stuck to a grinding work week and very little ability to actually go out and see the world that they wanted to. This phenomenon created tiki bars. Essentially, you had innovators like Trader Vic and Don the Beachcomber and all of these other tiki bar establishment owners and mixologists who wanted to create an exotic experience that persons in the 50s had never experienced before. And they took a little bit of sampling from cultures, a little bit of the Caribbean, a little bit of Polynesia, a little bit of their own fantasies, and they poured it into what they like to call tiki culture. And a byproduct of tiki culture, some think, is the idea of the iced daiquiri. Instead of crushed ice, a blender drink, such as this banana daiquiri here. We've blended together a banana and the usual daiquiri ingredients, most of them at least, smushed them all together into this thick, frothy substance, which tastes fantastic. And yes, it's supposed to be drunk with a straw, and that's why I'm killing myself with a mint leaf in my eye. But, you know, it's all for the cause. This sort of drink is not a traditional daiquiri. It has absolutely nothing to do with what was going on in Cuba. It has absolutely no provenance as a drink from a culture other than tiki, which became its own little culture. And you can argue that tiki's appropriation, tiki's colonialism, tiki's all sorts of various things can be raised about tiki culture. But for a moment here, let's just agree that they made something new out of a couple of ideas that were spinning around in their heads, and this idea that people wanted to have a island vacation getaway without ever leaving. And then we had later innovators who looked at the construction of what it was to be a daiquiri, went, so what if we just mix around with a few different flavors? What if we change the rum around? Now, a traditional daiquiri is supposed to be using Cuban rum, which none of these use as a disclaimer because sadly still Cuba is embargoed. We should probably fix that as a mixologist, but I'll leave it there. That means that the original rum was lost, so we could either replace it with a very good substitute, Bacardi, which was a Cuban rum at one point until it moved off to Puerto Rico and changed a few things here and there. What if we changed out the idea of we could either use a white or a gold or an amber rum, and what if we use a black rum, like this drink right here, which is called a Black Daiquiri, which, if you haven't had one, and you're a fan of black rum and molasses and all those heavier flavors you can get out of sugar, as I come back for a second sip, tastes phenomenal. It's this idea that it's still a daiquiri, it has all the right ingredients. Most people would see black rum going into a drink and say that can't be a daiquiri, that won't be a daiquiri. The flavor feels wrong to be a daiquiri. Or it's missing X, Y, and Z, or where's the really heavy fruity component? Well, that fruity component wasn't in there originally, it was added later to add to more modern tastes. So, in conclusion, daiquiris are whatever you really want them to be. If you have a drink that involves lime and ice and rum and sugar and has this sweet sort of a feeling, it puts you into this headspace of, I'm on a beach, I don't have to care about the sufferings of my life for a minute, I can sit back, put my feet up, have a nice day, and drink some rum. Wow, isn't that a daiquiri? Tell us what you think.